Good morning, everyone. This is not a Maxime Bernier Twitter roundup. This is a little Twitter skirmish that happened yesterday that is just the strangest thing I read this morning, and I want to share it with you. So here we go. Maxime Bernier tweeted out yesterday at 11 o'clock in the morning, quote, "Delusion, manipulation, irrationality, hypocrisy. Get ready for media frenzy and mass hysteria as climate alarmist cult saint at Gretta Thunberg brings her apocalyptic message to US and Canada." And here's the article, and we're going to go through this because the article outlines the hypocrisy, right? She's saying we shouldn't have carbon, we shouldn't make CO2 emissions when we cross the ocean, and I'm going to show you how it's done. And she does that. And, well, the hypocritical part is she can't do it. So here's the Daily Mail reporting. Greta Thunberg's 2-week trip across the Atlantic in, quote, zero carbon yacht may generate more emissions than it saves, as 2 of the crew have to fly to New York to bring the boat back to Europe. Greta Thunberg's transatlantic voyage on a zero-carbon yacht has been rocked by revelations that crew will fly to New York in a gas-guzzling plane to bring the boat back to Europe. It is claimed that this would generate more emissions than the yacht saves and threatens to leave the 16-year-old's plans to chart an environmentally friendly route to the United States in tatters. I'm going to pause here. Well, how many times has a 16-year-old's plans panned out exactly the way they thought? Never? Yeah, right, because they're 16. Okay, right back to this. Back to the article. On Wednesday, the Swedish eco-campaigner left Plymouth on the Malaysia 2 for a 2-week journey to the United Nations headquarters where she will address a climate change meeting. But last night, it was confirmed that 2 crew will have to fly to the U.S. East Coast city to man the 60-foot yacht on its return. And I scroll down. We added the trip to New York City at a very short notice, and as a result, 2 people will need to fly to the U.S. in order to bring the boat back, a Team Malaysia spokeswoman told The Times. She added, "The world has not yet found a way to make it possible to cross an ocean without a carbon footprint." Well, hold on a second. Are you water? No, you're a human. So the humans haven't found a way to cross an ocean without a carbon footprint. But the world can do that just fine because the world inhabits itself, right? Like water's a part of the ocean. And what a silly thing. The world hasn't made it yet, hasn't found a way. Come on. Who's writing this? Back to the article. As a further 2 sailors who are currently on board the Malaysia 2 with Greta may use air travel to get back to Europe. So there's lots of carbon being generated by this trip. It's not a zero carbon trip, despite Greta's best intentions. And well, that's fine. She's 16. However, Gerald Butts, disgraced former principal secretary, resigned in disgrace from the PMO, the Prime Minister's office, and now he's back running Justin Trudeau's re-election campaign, right? I don't know if he's running it. He's in the re-election campaign. I'm not sure if he's actually running it, but if you're best friends with the Prime Minister, well, you've probably got a plum position with the re-election campaign. He has taken issue with Mr. Bernier's pointing out the hypocrisy and the manipulation and delusion and irrationality, and he says, quote, "Right-wing populists the world over are attacking a 16-year-old who's fighting for a safer climate for herself and her generation. Here's the Canadian lead guitarist in the band. Climate change." That's a weird metaphor there, Gerald. I get it, but I think it's a dumb metaphor. So apparently you're not allowed to point out the hypocrisy or you become a right-wing populist. Well, I guess if you are on the right and you see this as the media stunt it is, and you point out the hypocrisy of this, you are a right-wing populist attacking a 16-year-old. This was sent out at 4:09 p.m. on August 31st. That's yesterday. Welcome to September, everybody. Wow. September 2019. We're right on the cusp of 2020. Okay, and this was at 5:44 p.m. that Greta tweeted this out. She says, "When haters go after your looks and differences, it means they have nowhere left to go. And then you know you're winning. I have Asperger's, and that means I'm sometimes a bit different from the norm. And given the right circumstances, being different is a superpower. I'm not public about my diagnosis to hide behind it, but because I know many ignorant people still see it as an illness or something negative, and believe me, my diagnosis has limited me before. Before I started school striking, I had no energy, no friends, and I didn't speak to anyone. I just sat alone at home with an eating disorder. All of that is gone now since I've found a meaning in a world that sometimes seems shallow and meaningless to so many people." That's Greta. And Mr. Bernier responds, and I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood where Greta was because this will come back and touch that. But Mr. Bernier responds to Mr. Butt's right-wing leader of the band comment, thusly. It says, left-wing climate alarmists the world over shamelessly use a 16-year-old to spread their lies. She's supposedly old and responsible enough to discuss important issues, but when she gets criticized, they accuse you of attacking a young girl. Typical neo-Marxist manipulation. This was sent at 5:58 p.m. yesterday. Gerald Butts fires back. I think Mr. Bernier's Twitter feed is being run by my critical theory TA from undergrad. I'll play along. I think Miss Thunberg is a principal, not an agent. Let's meet at the alley around 7 to dialogue. So, just so we understand here, Mr. Bernier is sticking really close to the issues. He says, you're using a 16-year-old to spread lies, according to Mr. Bernier, and I agree with him. She's supposedly old and responsible enough to discuss these important issues, but when she's criticized, you're accused of attacking a young girl. Typical neo-Marxist manipulation. The response is to undermine Bernier. He doesn't engage with any of the ideas, doesn't engage with using a 16-year-old to spread their message, doesn't engage with her being old enough and responsible enough to discuss these important issues. He says, I think your feed is being run by my critical theory TA from undergrad. That automatically grants Butts power over the supposed Twitter feed if you play into his rules, right? The rules are now that his TA is running this, so he knows the TA and can somehow guide this person into a better understanding. But it's ridiculous because it's totally trying to undermine Bernier, and it doesn't engage at all with any of the criticisms that Bernier has. And then Butts says, then I'll play along. I think Miss Thunberg is principal, not an agent. That means she's thinking for herself. She's not being played by anybody else. Well, she's got more than $1 million yacht and a team to take her across the Atlantic here, right? Like this isn't some 16-year-old who thought, I think I'll do something really hard and track a way across the Atlantic without emissions. This is a team. She's got a yacht and enough for airfare. Can you point to another 2 or 3 16-year-olds who've got those kind of resources? This looks staged to me, Gerald. And then the piece de resistance, the best part is he says, let's meet in the alley to discuss this. Are you joking? Like, you're a disgraced former principal secretary. I just don't see offering to meet Bernier in an alley at 7 as appropriate. I just think this is really, really odd. Like, it's really strange. If you've got an official position within the re-election campaign of Justin Trudeau and you're doing this on Twitter, this is weird. This is really, really weird. Okay? Bernier's response this morning, 7:58 a.m., September 1. He says, either Gretta Thunberg is a grown-up and in control of her life, in which case she can be criticized like anyone for the nonsense she spreads, or she's a poor little autistic girl, and then those who manipulate her are despicable child abusers. Pick one explanation and stick to it. And that's the response to that. And here's a further response. He says, by the way, this is Mr. Bernier, why did you and your alarmist friend Catherine McKenna reply to my first tweet with a cropped screenshot that didn't show the article I had linked to? You didn't want people to see how much of a hypocrite Greta Thunberg is? Dishonest. Here it is again. Here's the link. And this is Bernier taking the high ground because he's sticking to the actual content of the conversation and not falling for the ridiculous bait that Gerald Butts is trying to get him into here. He sticks to the main content and says, like, 1, she's hypocritical. 2, either you can engage in this discussion, and this discussion has 2 sides. It doesn't mean you have to pat her on the head and say she's right the whole time if she's old enough to engage in the discussion. And if she's not, why are we listening to her? Because that's a legitimate question, Gerald. Grow up, Gerald. So I think this was interesting. This just blew 5 o'clock this morning. I was reading through all this. I missed this yesterday. And I was like, what in the world? And then Bernier came up with the 8 a.m. I left it here at 5 a.m. And I thought, what is happening? Why is there no response? And then Mr. Bernier responded this morning. But my goodness, this is the state of Canadian politics currently. These people, Mr. Butts and crew, think this is appropriate. Is this who you want running the country? Because this is currently who's running the country. Thank you for watching, everybody. Check out thepeoplespartyofcanada.ca and have a wonderful, wonderful day.